everyone. Thanks for being here. This is a third in our series of learning from a distance. Typically the StudyPro has a lunch and learn series when we're all allowed to be together live. But we've moved that to a webinar series, obviously, called Learning from a Distance. And my name is Debbie Rosen. I'm a founder and owner of the StudyPro, and I'm joined by these three lovely ladies, which I will introduce here in a minute. Just quick housekeeping. Obviously, a lot of you have already found the chat. If you are thinking of questions that you have throughout the morning, we are going to try to power pack this and get through as much as we can, but just jot your questions down so we don't lose them in the chat. And then as we move to the Q&A, we'll go ahead and you can go ahead and put them in the chat. Also, we will stick around for as much Q&A as there is. So if you want to ask questions, please feel free to do that. So what is StudyPro and why are we here? We are an executive function and study skills center. So we are kind of in the heart of a lot of this distance learning. We do a lot of coaching with kids. We have obviously before COVID, we are now, and we're seeing that executive functions have been really challenged. There's just a slew of new challenges for all of us because we don't have our typical cues of getting up in the morning, getting dressed, getting out of school, knowing that we come home after sports, we're getting our homework started. So a lot of these are real challenges for us. We're also realists. We know that there's only so much that we can all do right now. And so what we're trying to do, and all the people that you see here have worked really hard to try to focus on the challenges that we may be having right now with distance learning and how we can give as many practical tips, tricks, our thoughts. We can get very, very deep into a lot of things with this crew. So please, think about the questions that you have, and if we don't hit them, then let us know, and we will try to do that. We're starting each one of our webinars with a little bit of humor. So no one is full of more false hope than a parenting making a colorful daily schedule for their kids during COVID-19. I know that I didn't even bother. I just tried to find those anchor activities that I knew were like super important for my family. And we talked about it in our very first webinar. So with that, I want to introduce our panel of distinguished guests. They're all part of our StudyPro executive function coaching team, but they also work in major school districts around this Northern Virginia area. We'll start with Lindsay. So Lindsay is an assistive technology instructor and has started really as a special education teacher. She's an unbelievable pro. She's our center director at the StudyPro, and she really has just a wealth of knowledge. Anna is a school psychologist right now for a public high school. She has a long history and was trained in K through 12 with focus on early childhood development. She's worked with all types of students, specializes in ADHD and executive function, and a lot of her practical experience, even though she's trained in early childhood, has been with middle school and high school. And Chelsea Boateng is a professional high school counselor and with a concentration on neuroscience, specifically in regards to early childhood, but she also has a ton of experience that we think is really valuable for us, not only in childhood development, but also growth mindset. And so those are things that are very important to all of us right now, knowing that if we have some missing skills in any of the areas around executive function that, for us, we believe that no matter where kids are, we can help them build those skills. And so this is a little bit of what we're trying to share today with you. So here's our first piece of great advice. If you're feeling guilty about your student or child watching too much TV, just put it on mute, put the captions on, and boom, now they're reading. So hopefully you find that as funny as I do. I don't know why, this just cracks me up every time. I had to share it with you all. So hopefully you find that a little amusing. So let's start with routines. Of course, here's the thing that's interesting about routines is that routines work and then they don't. A lot of us are getting a little bit tired of sitting in front of our kids, sitting in front of the computer every single day. We know it's been easier for some than others. And so, there may be some things that are working and some things that are not. So what I wanted to do is to start with, how do we change up routines when we know that some parts are working and some parts aren't, or our kids are struggling to follow routine? And we're going to start with Chelsea and talk a little bit about that. So Chelsea, I'll turn it over to you.
So one thing when we're thinking about routines is that it takes a long time to build a routine. It takes a long time to get rid of routine that you don't like or a habit. Um, and so all of a sudden, our normal routines were just kind of cut short. And so we're having to build new routines out of a very nebulous kind of feeling. So I think, as Debbie mentioned, taking some of those anchors, right? Some of those things that already prime our brain to do something, taking a shower in the morning, having breakfast in the morning, getting up at a certain time, even if it's not the same time that you had previously, making sure that our brain is still being cued to start our day, and say to ourselves, okay, we're going to do this, and then that's going to prime me for my instruction, or that's going to prime me to engage in some of that academic work that I need to do. The other thing is, because this time seems so nebulous, we're used to having a specific time for our preferred activities. So then all of a sudden it feels like, well, now all I have to do is work. Am I going to get to do the things that I like? So also part of those anchors would be, taking those preferred activities and saying, okay, a preferred activity is a non-negotiable. Waking up at a certain time is a non-negotiable. Eating, non-negotiable, right? Academic time, maybe not, when, but, instruction time. Those things are our non-negotiables. We're going to plot those now. We're going to put that in our routine now. So you know exactly when you're going to have to do your academic time, but also when you're going to get your preferred activity time. And then you can start putting in some of those pockets of, academic time. Or if you have a specific Zoom, if you're doing synchronous learning, you want to make sure you're putting those in. So I think it's just taking kind of the old routines that we had and putting them in, and then kind of working with that. And it may not be set every day. It may, that's why I like to use that term, pockets of time. It may not be the same every day, but you kind of want to make it so that your brain has those cues, so that it can start engaging in some of that work.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chelsea. One of the words that I like a lot, when my son was working with some specialists early on, is this idea of non-negotiables, right? And the idea of family values. So we as a family have values about how we're spending our time and some of the routines, and we may not have to have strict routines, but there are some things that are just non-negotiable. So it's important for you, speaking to your child, as you're saying, Chelsea, to make sure that you have your time. And we know we want that to happen. So as our family values are making commitments and keeping our commitments, which in this case now is school, we're going to do that. And we're going to also, because we know your needs are important, we're going to schedule that you time, as you're talking about. But we also know that with kids, making routine work a lot of it has to do with novelty. So can you talk to us, Anna, a little bit more about how can we make routines a little bit easier by freshening them up?
Yeah, absolutely. So one easy way to do this now is varying our environment, right? So when we were in the classroom, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of change it up. A lot of time might be sitting in your seat with some breaks built in. But now we are all in our homes, and we can kind of change it up, right? So, one thing is we don't always have to be, sitting at the desk in the room or the desk in the study or the living room or the kitchen table. We can go to different places of the house on different days, or just for different classes. I have one student that I work with that said that they go to a different section of the house for each of their classes because it felt more like transition throughout the day. And that really works for them. And I think time where you can explore those different learning styles too. So if your student likes to move, then maybe when they're listening to videos, they can put headphones in and go for a walk. So they're still getting that content while moving. Another thing that helps with that, if they do need to be sitting and like taking notes, those resistance bands that we have for like working out can actually go on the bottom legs of chairs. And, you know, children and teens really benefit from kind of like kicking those as a way of movement, or just fidgets in general. So something just to move in your hand while you're trying to stay focused. I mean, for me, that's often clicking my pen, which is distracting when it's like in an office full of people, but now it's just me. And so that's something that I can do. So it's really figuring out what works. And then there are some things though that we do want to, you know, keep as those non-negotiables for our environment as much as possible too, right? So, you know, we do say to try and stay away from the bed as much as you can, because our brains associate that with sleep. And so if we start doing work in our beds, it just kind of confuses our brain and it doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know if we need to go to sleep or if we need to now work in our bed. So just as much as possible, try to avoid that. And then if you are having to take notes, then a hard surface is recommended. Now I know that the reality is it's not always going to be quiet or completely distraction free in our homes right now. And that's okay. So it's trying to limit those distractions as much as possible. So maybe it's just putting headphones in or kind of turning away from everything else happening in the room. So just, you know, figuring out what works. And I think, you know, one fun thing too is that you could just take a list of everything that you have in your house that could be a new environment, put it in a hat, especially for younger kids, have them choose one every morning. And then that would be, you know, a fun way to start their day.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's great. You know, I'm lucky enough because I have this entire space at the StudyPro open for use for my daughter, and she comes here every other day and picks a different place to sit. And I think that's really worked for her. I mean, she was super excited about sitting at the front desk as though she was like the office manager. So Carolyn, watch out because your job is maybe in jeopardy. But that's really helped her. And when she was finding that she was a little bit behind, that just varying her environment has really made a difference. So with that, we know that distance learning is hard and it's just so different across the board for so many different schools. Some kids parents are feeling the kids don't have enough work and they're trying to figure out how to give them more assignments. Some have, you know, it's like coming out of a fire hose. Certainly one of the biggest challenges that we've seen with the kids that we're coaching across the board is just following and tracking what it is have to do. And so Lindsay, can you take us through, you know, maybe some parents really are way into the portals and they know exactly what's going on, but some parents may not, and they may not know exactly, you know, how challenging it might be to actually find some of these materials.
Now, you just said two really important things, the following and tracking. It really is a two-part process, and that is what can make it a challenge. And because the homework portals are different, there's a lot of digging. If I could go back and add a class to my master's degree program, it would be just understanding all the different portals and what they look like and how to dig through them and where things can be posted, because it really is a skill. But we want to keep in mind that parents don't have to be the experts, but there's 3 features that can really, really help when you're digging through that. And when the students are digging through that, we want to make sure that we're getting all the information in one place, one landing spot. We want to make sure we are getting it offline. Because there's so much online, we want to avoid the friction that comes from having to open up more tabs, go find it, go digging again. So once it's all in one place, if we can get it on the offline, that's the second piece. And then the third piece is also then just acknowledging what's done and acknowledging what's still to do. So what you'll see here, what you're seeing on your screen on the slides is an example of no one can argue that this is not a very well organized distance learning structure. But what the challenge is that this links to something else and this links to something else, and then each assignment has different actual activities and lists for the day. So the to-dos for the day can get kind of long. And what we want to do is first give ourselves the permission and our children the permission to slow down and just plan our day and just try to get everything we can in one spot so we know what to expect. So on the next slide, we have a little example of first things first is especially for synchronous learning. This is an example of a Google Calendar of a student who has all the purples are Zoom classes, and each one, of course, has a different Zoom link. So we just wanted to take the time and put all of those into a calendar so she had one landing space to jump off from, so that everything was there. She wasn't digging through email, she wasn't digging through different posts from her teachers, trying to look for the announcement of her teacher for what that Zoom link would be. This is just one spot. And the conversation started with, that's going to take too long. And so I did a little experiment of actually timing it. And we said, this is the first time you've ever used Google Calendar. This is the first time you've ever put anything in electronically. And it only took 7 minutes from start to finish. So by putting in that investment to actually plan and organize and get everything in one spot, it really is an investment in your time that saves all the friction later of then having to go exactly what I was describing before, of find the links, look for the email. Hopefully I didn't delete it. Hopefully I remember who sent it. Was it the learning specialist? Was it my teacher? Was it the grade head? I'm not sure. So really it's about just slowing down, giving yourself the permission to actually have the planning time and get everything in one spot. And then this is an example of, this is one classes, what you're seeing here. This is the expectations for a science class throughout the week. Again, beautifully organized. This is all in one spot for science. And so one strategy that a student could use is just print this off and then check it off throughout the day. And this is that piece of one, it's in one place. It is getting it offline if we can print it off. And then that third piece of acknowledging what's done and what's still to do. So that physical check helps that student feel more in control. It's acknowledging what I got completed. And then anything that isn't checked off are the to-dos for the next day.
Do you want to talk about how you could fold this, Lynn?
Oh yeah, thank you. Because seeing this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, opening this up might be too overwhelming for students. I know even for myself, I might assume that there's so much to do. And I've even had students, and I know Chelsea and Anna have had this reaction from students too. I'm never going to get through all of this. So one of those strategies, once you get it offline, is just to fold it in half, fold it in thirds, fold it in quarters, so that you're just seeing one day at a time. I might even fold it like a very origami-esque and just have that bottom left corner where it says the academic task. And that's what I want them to key in on. That's what I want them to almost zoom in on. And so that's just a little strategy of just making it less overwhelming and not letting our brain jump to conclusions that's going to take forever, or I'm never going to be able to get all of this work done.
So quickly, Jennifer, in this case, the school did prepare this calendar, but the point is that they still have to go through and figure out what is my schedule today. It's 8 o'clock, am I supposed to be in science or math or what? And then when I go into this, which is beautifully prepared, we still have to go into the links in here. And that's really why we think it's so important to try to create kind of a front end, which is really what we showed here. And Lindsay will talk about the fact that it doesn't have to be on Google Calendar. There can be, we can even write it down if people aren't comfortable with the technology. I know that I was able to create a Word, or in my case, a PowerPoint document, where every day I just created, this is the science, this is the math, so every slide was a new example of what Monday looked like, so that my student didn't have to go all the way, through every single one of these sheets. That's maybe not necessary for all kids. Maybe they can go ahead and navigate it, but it's really, we'll get into this in a second, a lot about then tracking it. And so I'll let you keep going there, Linz.
And I think I saw in the comments that for their school that it's just a list of everything on the assignment page. And so screenshotting is another really useful tool that I've found in my weapon of executive function coaching right now, is just screenshotting that actual assignment page in that list. And then this is an example of color coding that third piece of acknowledging what's done and what's acknowledging what's still to do. And so this is just, the color coding is green is done, and that means done, submitted, I emailed, or I posted it to Dropbox, or I submitted in the way that was expected. And then the yellows are the still to do's. And the important point of this, and that we want to make sure that parents, if you see at the top, this is expectations for these assignments due at 8 p.m. at night. Now, if we were to check in with that student at 7:50 and said, hey, how was your day? Did you get everything done? That's just asking a recipe for disaster, because at that point, there's little that we can do to write the course and shift the focus of that student. So we want to say, More check-ins, actually, it provides the accountability that students are needing right now, but it also provides the opportunity for them to share their successes, to get that ball rolling. Yes, I got this one done. I got this one done. I still have these 3 to do. So it really is just about keeping that momentum going. So we really suggest a midday check-in versus just the end of the day check-in if there's assignments that are due that day. And this question on the screen, this what if there's assignments that aren't completed, because we're living in a reality that, of course, there are times where there's not going to be work that's completed on that day. And it's almost like magic. It just moves so fast, and then poof, those assignments from today disappear, and then the next day there's this bright, shiny new list of to-dos for the day, and it just seems overwhelming. And our brains really want to forget about the previous day's assignments, but they're never really forgotten. They're kind of hovering in the back of our minds, and they can have this undercurrent of stress for the student and the parent. And so what we want to say, the keys here, as far as like tracking your work, so it's not just about knowing what you have to do, but it's also about tracking what you're doing and when you're going to do it. So these are just some examples of having your running list of your assignments. And this is the way of acknowledging what got done, what is still to do, so it doesn't disappear. I often say that if you do something every day, it becomes a habit. And when you acknowledge something every day, it becomes a habit. But we have a tendency to want to forget about goals that weren't achieved or assignments that weren't completed. So the tip here to keep in mind is when it comes to missing work, we want to make it really visible. We want to make it big and actually have that tracking be not hidden. I often say that right now, I used to get on the scale every day because it would be less scary if I got on the scale every day. It became a habit. And I'm really not practicing what I preach right now because I have not gotten on the scale in a very long time. And the idea of it is terrifying right now. But if I kept that scale in the closet, out of sight, out of mind, I would have to wait until I felt like using it to actually go use it. And guess what? I'm never going to actually feel like doing it. So the same thing goes with the list of missing work. We want to make it visible because if it's even online, we want to make sure it's offline, it's something big and visible. Even if it's in a closed notebook, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So you probably can see over my shoulder here, it's probably the words are reversed, but this is just an example. It's just painter's tape up on the wall that has the to do, doing, and done. And this is called a Kanban board, but this is just a way that if there is any missing work that we're trying to track, you can just write it on a Post-it note and have it in the to-do column. And what you'll also probably notice is there's only one thing in the doing at a time. And so it's just about making it bite-sized and making it manageable, but making it visible. That's something we have to acknowledge every day and say, if we have that 3 to 4 o'clock window every afternoon, that this is our, okay, this is our catch up. This is our buffer time, that this is where we can use to take something off of that to-do list and do it during that buffer time. That just helps that train moving, and it helps us not forget about any missing works, and it helps us track it.
I love that, Lindsay. And I think it's great now, especially when it could be fun for kids to be able to do that. And it's even more satisfying for some kids to be able to just take those and move them over and also rip them up when they're done, which is really nice. A lot of times the Kanban board on a home wall doesn't work as well because the kids are moving back and forth, but obviously now in sequester it works really well. And so we say often, obviously, that lists aren't plans, because just because you have it on a list doesn't mean that you have a plan to get it done. So let's talk a little bit about that. And that's a point that we'd really like for parents to take away, is that it is important to keep a list, but then you don't want to have to start fighting with your kid about a plan. So how do we do that? And I'll also note that this particular plan is available on our website to download. If you go under the programs tab, either in the remote coaching or remote homework center, you can download this.
And I think exactly what Debbie was saying is there is a big difference between a list and a plan. And one of the big distinguishing features is what you're going to do, when you're going to do it. And so you'll see here, what we want you to kind of cue in on, and what's important is that in the assignment column, we want to have students be as specific as possible. It really doesn't help us to track assignments if it just said math homework. Because as the days keep rolling and poof, there's that new bright shiny list, it's going to say new math homework. So we want to be able to track what was done, what's still to do. So we want to make sure we label it ideally with whatever it is in the assignment center. If the teacher said homework number 4, if it said homework radicals number 4, we would put homework radicals number 4, because that's specificity. It actually gives us that direction, and it actually allows us to see, okay, if that's missing in the grade book, I can go back and I can know what I have to do and not go digging as much anymore. And then the other thing we want to have you cue in on is the what's left column. And that's just acknowledging that it's not, we might have a plan, but plans don't always go according to how we expect them to. And so there is occasions that we run out of time, we're hit a wall, we're feeling exhausted, but we didn't get our goals met that day. And so we also want to be really specific in the what's left column. So because this student specifically put for science, their goal was to do the Big Bang web quest numbers 15 through 28, that level of specific gave them the opportunity to say, I have 21 through 28 to do. So that primes them to have their to-do list all ready for the next day. I know what I'm going to pick up with. It's not just saying what I didn't get done, it's saying I know what I'm going to do tomorrow. And so if it just said some of it left, half of it left, part of it left, that's when our mind can do the imagination and say, it's going to take forever. This one we can look at and say, okay, you have 7 problems to do, and it gives us that plan for the next day. So be specific in your assignment listing and be specific in your what's left.
Perfect, thank you. And so that's a perfect transition to our next question, because one of the biggest challenges we know that these kids are having right now are really, and the next and last question, are really around motivation. And motivation, the big point, big takeaway we want everyone to hear is that, I guess there's a couple. One is behavior is actually communication, and I know that Anna will talk about that. But also that sometimes it's just they don't know how to get started. So we often hear when people call us, oh, you know, I tell them to do their homework. I ask them if they studied, but what does really studying mean? Have you ever had to do a project? Have you ever had to do something you didn't know exactly how to get started? And so the point that Lindsay just made is that if you're moving from one thing and you know that then you have to do more tomorrow, the idea of leaving that breadcrumb is to help you get started. Oh, start 28. So you're not using all your energy about where to get started. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna and talk a little bit about, you know, how are students communicating with their behavior right now when it looks like they're not motivated?
Yeah, and so, you know, this is kind of through in a pandemic and not in a pandemic, but I think right now we are experiencing a lot of different emotions, and us as adults, we're pretty good most of the time of being able to identify and regulate. I mean, we're definitely not perfect at that either, but we do have a bit more skills than a lot of our children do. And so they struggle to identify those emotions that they're feeling, and a lot of times that comes out in those behaviors. And so it might just look like that they're shutting down, that they're not wanting to do the work. And like Debbie said, that might not be the case at all. It might be that they don't know how to get started. They're feeling very overwhelmed by everything. They don't know how to navigate all these different platforms. They might be missing their friends if they're not having synchronous learning. There's so many other things that can be at play. And so, you know, we have to kind of be those detectives and figure out, you know, what's going on. And we can do that by asking questions, right? But we also we always want to assume the positive. We don't want to go in with the negative. And then, you know, if something isn't completed, we'll make the plan of action, right? But we don't want to automatically go in and be like, oh, so did you complete this? We kind of want to frame it as, you know, I'm really excited to see that project that you were working on. Or when you were doing those, was there anything that was challenging for you? Was there anything super exciting that happened today? And so also try and stay away from those yes or no questions and really try and support that effort that they have, that they're putting forward. And so that also kind of can just get a dialogue going in general, but then also doesn't automatically assume that they haven't done the work, and kind of shows, that you're interested to see the work that they are doing.
Debbie, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I
That's
always mute my mic and then I forget to put it back on. So what I was about to say was, if you've heard Rachel Bailey speak at the StudyPro, we talk about a lot about the deposits and withdrawals. And it's really important right now that we're giving as many deposits and understanding that the kids are really, many kids are really struggling with, to your point, Chelsea, earlier, when they're going to get their U time, because there's that drag of every day getting in front of the screen and finishing this long list of things to do. So can you talk a little bit about, how we can, as Dr. Dalton says, water the seeds and not the weeds? What's the best way for parents to do that with kids to try to maintain that relationship so when they do ask about the homework, it's not feeling so stressed?
So one thing that I've been saying a lot in my, professional life and in kind of coaching right now is that connection before correction. And even in my own personal life, I have toddlers at home. And so, trying my best to make sure that we're spending a lot of time together, right? And most of the time we remember how we feel, not what was said. So if we can create these moments, even if it's on a topic that we don't really like talking about, like homework, is there a way that we can bring connection to that instead of just correction? Because the correction's not going to help. It might help for a few students that have that real internal drive to succeed, but in general, it's not very effective. And we find that in, if our bosses, right? If our bosses come at us with something positive or the ability to be understanding and like, hey, I see that you didn't get this done. How can I support you? We're much more motivated and much more willing to do the thing that we need to get done. So that connection before correction is something that I'm using a lot. And I'm also, a couple things that I've been noticing a lot with this motivation piece is it's not so much just a lack of motivation, but there's a real lack of accountability. And what I mean is accountability isn't you show up to school. If you show up to school, you're being held accountable. That's not happening right now. There's a lot of anxiety. And anxiety comes out in a lot of different ways. Sadness, being lethargic, angry, procrastinating. There's a lot of ways that anxiety shows itself. And most kids aren't going to be like, hey, I'm anxious. Can I get some support with that? So, all these things that, it might feel like, oh, my kid won't get out of bed. They have the plan. We checked on it. I showed him how to do it. I showed her this thing. Why isn't she or he doing it? It's probably really overwhelming. I had one coaching student that I worked with, and he was like, I really want to do my work, but every time I do an assignment, I think about all the assignments that I still have. And then I feel guilty because I'm not working on them. So then I can't focus on the assignment I'm doing, right? And so we had to really make a plan and use some strategies about writing down our thoughts, about chunking our time throughout the day. So maybe we can spend a little time on each assignment. But that anxiety piece, I think, is huge and is a big barrier to motivation, especially for our kids who usually are pretty motivated, but also for our kids who sometimes we have to work really hard for that motivation piece. The other thing, too, I've seen, too, is like that trust piece. Like typically kids are in a place where they trust that the person is going to be teaching them. And now that may not be here. And it's also that trust of yourself. Can I trust myself to do this thing correctly? I don't have anybody here that I can just be like, hey, can you help me? I have a question. There's a lot of different systems in place right here. So the thing with motivation is, I think, identifying, again, being a detective with your student, what is that barrier? Not just why aren't you doing it? Because they might not be able to know. But if you can ask some of those questions, and if you can set those checks and balances in place to support them, it's probably going to move you along farther. And then you can really understand, oh, that's what's going on. And it's probably something similar that's going on with you, right? You know, Anna said earlier that we're pretty good at regulating ourselves, but this whole crisis pandemic thing has really tested a lot of us in our being able to regulate our own emotions and, you know, going through some of those things. So if it's testing us, it's probably testing our kids. So if we can identify for ourselves and then also for our students, that's going to be helpful in kind of problem solving our motivation barriers.
And one of the big challenges, to your point of all the point about the behavior, is just getting started.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that when we all as adults have really big projects, and sometimes I use the example of like a marathon, why don't we start training for a marathon? Because we just don't think we can run one.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes these kids think that all of these assignments are like little mini marathons or even big marathons. So what we wanted to leave you with before we move to Q&A is some examples of how can we as parents address our kids, to your point, Chelsea, of the way that our boss might come to us, or I can't remember if Anna said that, but the way we would want our boss to come to us about something. What can we say to our kids to help them get started? And I think these are some examples. We don't necessarily want to read them all to you, but the idea is really trying to help them, model for them, and help them get started. I'll let Lindsay, do you want to kind of cover a couple of these, and maybe you guys can practice your screenshot skills, and we can send these out too.
And I think
You
this
guys
is
can
kind of
screenshot
acknowledging the false assumption that we all have with motivation, is that motivation is the precursor to get started, but
Mm-hmm.
actually getting started helps kickstart the motivation. So what we want to focus on is not necessarily how can I motivate my student right now, but maybe how to help motivate my students to get started. And we really want them to see us as an ally and not a dictator, and not saying using certain words like need, you have to, you must. It takes away a lot of the autonomy that helps with motivation, and it takes away a lot of the choice that helps with motivation. So you'll see some of the language that it's a subtle difference, but it's a really important difference. Instead of saying you, if we use we language and let's try, and if we use that, it sounds inclusive, it sounds like we're a team and that we're attacking the problem together, that you're not the problem, you're not failing, there's a problem at hand, and it's trouble is getting started. So how can we attack this together and say, let's just try. Why don't we try changing up the space? Do you want to try working in the living room today versus in your bedroom? And it actually gives them a chance to make some choice there and kind of direct. And when we feel like we have a little bit of control over our day, we do refill that motivation tank. And that's what's really what Chelsea was describing is pretty low at the moment.
Yeah, and I do think that what's true, and I think it's hard for all of us as parents, because we have our own anxieties. And I'm going to kind of move into the Q&A here a little bit, and we'll start with Lucy's questions, but I'll kind of make a bridge to that, which is the fact that I think a lot of times we are concerned, and to Lucy's very valid point, that, you know what, if they don't learn these skills now, if they don't finish this homework, then they're going to not do as well in their class, and they're going to not learn these skills, and they're going to have a harder time over time. And I think we have to work hard as parents to not allow that runaway train of our thoughts, even though it's of course very, very true, and try to start with validating for, you know, where the kids, to be honest, the kids' pain, you know, getting through all 50 of these, 30 of these problems right now is really hard. And you know, sit down from their view, look from their view, and understand how have you felt when you felt overwhelmed by what their view, even though you think 30 problems just knock them out. Oh boy, that's a lot. What do you think we could do? Like, be the detective, like you would want your boss to be with you, or someone when you're feeling stressed. You think maybe we could just start with 5, or maybe I'll set the timer, to Lindsay's point about, do you think I could set the timer and say, how many do you think you can get done in 5 minutes? Or let's do some jumping jacks for a little bit. Or I know with older kids that might not work, but just thinking of some way to help make sure they understand that you understand how they're feeling, and then you're trying to come up with solutions together. I know it stinks to have to get it done, and I'm, you know, maybe a little bit at a time is a way to think about that. But in the bigger picture, we do, to answer Susan's question, we do teach classes for study skills, and we do help kids to understand that they have a role in learning, right? They're receiving information from their teachers. They have to retain it using some sort of set of study skills, and they recall it. And it's the same cycle that goes for every single class, for every single week, for every single month, for every single year. And those are the skills that are really important as they get, bigger in life. And I think so many times we confuse school with content versus the process piece, right? That it's really about learning this particular content when it really is about mastering that process of how do I listen actively? How do I use study skills? And then how do I use kind of test taking strategies? So do any of you guys here have a view of how you would want to talk to a student to help motivate them and see a bigger picture, even though, it's harder, obviously, as they're younger for them to see what is important to them when they're 20 or 25?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to a little example with a student that I had this week that was extremely low motivation for getting started on a test that was going to be multiple days. And the assumption was, I can do it on Tuesday, it's due on Tuesday. Why in the world would I get started on Sunday? And I was like, just trying to find the hypotheticals of finding your why. Well, what could be the benefits of starting on Sunday? And if I had just lectured and said, these are all the benefits on why you have to start on Sunday, it would have shut down and I wouldn't have heard. But if you're generating some of those thoughts, like what could the possible potential benefits give you? And he was able to come up with a lot of good ones of saying, okay, well, if I get started and I get stuck, I can ask for help. I can tell my teacher if the internet crashes, then I don't need to panic that I only have a few minutes to finish it. He was able to, in a moment of calm, generate some of those ideas. So I think it's really tasking the student in a neutral time, not in the moment, but stepping away from the moment a little bit and having them develop their why. Like why would the benefits, instead of trying to preach or lecture about what you see the benefits of being, and they might have different ones. And sometimes a lot of the benefits we have are just to get you off my back, or just to have you not follow up with me, or just to feel like I can do it. And that's okay. That's a lot of the whys that I have, is just to get it off my list so I don't have to see it again. It doesn't have to be profound.
That's what I was going to, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That was the big thing for me too, is, we all know that, speaking even like to our partners, right, in a moment of anger, that's not going to get anywhere. So if there are again, those pockets of time where even if it's just a little check-in about asking about those open-ended questions in a time of calm, so you can get that information. Like, what was hard about that? What is motivating to you? How would this be more motivating to you? Like, if you can give them some of that control, because we're in a world right now where they don't have a whole lot of control over things. We don't have a whole lot of control. So if you can, in a time of calm, give them some of that control and some of that, even your younger ones, again, talking about those non-negotiables, but also just, what would you like? When would you like to do this? Let's try it out. Now, if it doesn't work, we might have to come back to it. But giving them some of that ownership and control, so they do kind of start to feel some of that internal motivation, I think might be helpful.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Mm-hmm.
So Alice had asked a question that early on. My son wants screen games all the time. We struggle with schoolwork breaks, where he wants his screen time for a break. We feel like that's just one more screen. What do you all think?
I can start with that. There's the mini breaks throughout the day while you're doing your work and while you're trying to accomplish your goals. And then there's the end of the day, big A++ breaks. And so that's what we're trying to recommend to students, is to keep the screen time to the end of the day until the goal list is met as your A++, like the Netflix, it's the video game, it's the Minecraft, whatever it might be, logging on with your friends can be the end of the day goal when I have to accomplish my to-do list for the day, because it really does make it more satisfying. And how I approach it with students a lot is just say, you can actually really enjoy that downtime versus having this panic of, oh, I'm taking a break. When am I going to end? Is mom going to walk by and tell me to get back to work? And it just feeds this undercurrent of stress when I can't really truly enjoy it and have this open free time. So we want to say we have a list on our website, on our blog, about some transition activities that are really good break activities as well, because they're time bound. They have a natural stopping point. The problem with screens is that there is no natural stopping point. I mean, I was just digging in with a student the other day. I literally was asking him, when you're playing Minecraft, what is the cue to stop? Because there's some games that when you die, that's a good cue to stop, or you get to the next level, might be a good cue to stop. There's some that just keep you engaged. So we really try to say there's lots of fun, engaging breaks that are off the phone or the computer. And we do want to rest our eyes, and there is a lot to be said at just stepping away from the screens during the day while we're getting our tasks done. And then when those goals are met, then there you have those 8+ break rewards.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lindsay. So we had a question from Alice about some examples of connection before correction. Chelsea, I'll give that to you for different age groups. And if Alice, you have a specific age group you wanted us to focus on, maybe you can chat to us.
Mm-hmm. So, I actually primarily work in elementary schools. So I definitely have, I'm trained in all, but I primarily work in the elementary schools, and I have 4-year-olds. And it honestly looks pretty similar though for a lot of age groups, as far as, so just the other day when, one of my toddlers spilled their juice everywhere for like the 100th time that day, and I almost went, why? Like, I almost exploded. I was anxious. I had been working hard all day. I didn't want to clean up sticky juice again, right? But I took a deep breath, and I was kind of like, okay, bud, what do we do? And he went and grabbed his towel. We cleaned it up together. I was still upset because I had to rush off to the next thing. And so then as we were cleaning, we talked about, okay, when we are eating, we need to put our juice away from our hands. So like, I could have exploded, which I've done, right? I'm not saying that I don't do that in times, but there are also times when if we just take that breath and we think about, my goal is to get them to not spill their juice, or my goal is to get them to initiate or work independently. How am I going to achieve that? I'm not going to achieve that by constantly correcting them, right? Because it's going to go in one ear, not the other, and it's just going to feel more anxiety. So if I can connect with them and figure out for them, ask those open-ended questions. I noticed that you got your social studies and your reading done today. That's awesome. I also noticed that this is the second day that, you have math for the next day. Is math really challenging for you? Is it hard to learn in this distance learning, right? Because the correction would be, I can't believe this is the second day in a row, that you didn't get your math done. What is going on for you? They're going to shut down. But if we use some of that language, I'm wondering, I'm curious, I've noticed, can you explain this to me? Can you tell me more? That's that connection piece, because then your student hopefully is like, oh, wait, they want to listen to me, right? I don't just have to listen to them. I can actually explain it. And they might not be able to explain it either, especially for the younger kiddos. That's the hard part, is a lot of the questions might look the same, but the way in which they can explain it is different. So part of it is you validating kind of whatever they say, right? Yeah, I get that's probably really hard. I get that you don't know how you're feeling. You're just feeling, well, I get that you're really missing your friends, and that's so important to you right now, right? How can we engage? How can we create that, connection for you in other ways so that it helps you support you in this? Can we create a study group, right? So it's more understanding and building that bridge between you and your student in a time that is really emotional.
Yeah. And I think the connections, I think the connections, I know you were looking for middle and high school to Chelsea's point. No. To Chelsea's point, a lot of it is about the validation. Mm-hmm. And as we often say, just validation doesn't mean you agree with them. Right. You could completely disagree with them. But what you're agreeing with is that they are feeling that emotion honestly, right? And so you're connecting, if you hear, this is an extreme example, but my goldfish die. Well, you know what? Maybe you have other things you're worried about as a parent, but their disappointment is sincere, right? And that's the part you're connecting with. And that kind of goes back to Alice and other people that are asking this about the deposits and withdrawals, finding as many ways as we possibly can to make the deposits for our kids. It doesn't mean giving them things. It means just, again, really connecting with them and figuring out how we can find the smallest things they do and examples of, like, maybe they didn't get all their homework done, but finding a way to say, wow, you know what? I see that social studies you got done was so hard, instead of weeds, which is, this is the part you didn't get done. Amber had asked a question: what are your tips to motivate the unmotivated who may not have the support from parents at home? I work for a cyber school in PA, come across this all the time. How can I offer positive suggestions without being the nag from schools always calling to say they have this amount of work to complete? Well, you guys know so much because you're always the nag. We all are, right? The people who are calling to say here. And I'll start someone off and then see who might want to take this. But I'll start off by saying, a big piece that we believe at StudyPro here is the idea, the heart of everything is around planning. And planning isn't just the big plan. Sometimes it's those small little initiation strategies that we talked about on the slide before, which is just the littlest of way. We all know that, if we get our gym shoes on and our tennis shoes on and everything, that we're more likely to just take that first step. So anyway, Anna, you look like you have something you might want to add here about how can we help not just be the nags.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of that goes back to some of the things that Chelsea was just talking about too, of like, we also are their cheerleaders, right? So starting off with that piece and not automatically going to, oh, but you still have all of this left to do, right? So start with, what happened today? What was the positive? Start with that connection. And then also just with that empathy, right? Like, we know that this is a really, really difficult time. And especially if they're not having that accountability at home, it's even more difficult. And so realizing that with them, validating that, and then working with them to kind of figure out where can they start. Because it might also be that they're so overwhelmed that they have absolutely no idea how to even get started. And it's so much easier just to avoid when you don't know where to begin. And it's a mountain in front of you and it's growing harder. Like, it's getting higher and higher and higher, and you are not ready to climb Mount Everest. So breaking that down for them to just something really, really small so they can feel that success and then move on to the next thing.
And a couple other things I know you guys will talk about is, we always find that some of they haven't even necessarily read the directions, and that's not to be critical, but some of it's just about helping, sit side by side, like slumping onto the floor with them or wherever, and just being their partner in it. Okay, well, you know what? Let's take a look at these directions and see what clues they give us. And, I think you can vary that from high school all the way down to the smallest kids, and trying to figure out, like, again, being that Columbo, right? And I think that's the key, is trying to get into their world. And sometimes they're just too tired to even start by looking at the directions, right? So that's, I think, a big key for them. So anything else you guys want to add?
I did want to add specifically for Amber. I think that the difference that can help too about being between nagging and actually being seen as an ally is not just providing the reminders, but providing the strategies. So if you're checking in with students, and especially distance or remotely, and parents can do this too with a text or an email or something, that it's not just have you done or checking in with what's still to do, but if you're checking in with, okay, let's try this strategy. You were going to try a new location to work in today. Send me a picture of your new setup. Or, oh, I can't wait to see that. Send me a list of the plan that you made. Oh, if you're actually priming them to use a strategy, that's even better. And especially, this can be for parents too, but also for just educators in general, is doing that phrasing and that priming for them already to be successful in using that strategy. So let's check in tomorrow at 2. If you do it specifically of, instead of that hypothetical, if you need help, let me know, because that vagueness and that openness is really hard to initiate on. But if we just kind of say, if we're trying not to be a nag and just about giving reminders, but actually we want to be giving solutions. And so sometimes that solution is just we need some face-to-face time as well.
And that just reminds them, exactly, Alice, it's like partnering with them for a shared goal. It just reminds me a lot when you read these articles about how do you help a neighbor or a friend who's sick. If you just said to them, call me if you need anything, it's not the same as showing up with the casserole, right? I mean, it's really, and I think that's the spirit with which we want to kind of keep this in mind.
Do you mind if I just share one thing?
No, I was just going to say, why don't we share some final thoughts that we might not have shared before? Chelsea.
Well, on this point too, and it could be kind of a final thought, is we're also trying to think realistically, right? So there's a perfect world and then there's a realistic world. And if you have a student, if you're working with a student or it's your own student, and that motivation isn't there for whatever reason, but especially I think it was to Amber, who is, maybe kind of checking with multiple students, not very often, asking them what they can do or prioritizing. Okay, what is an essential skill that you're going to need for next year? Probably reading and math. So if we can prioritize those and you can get those accomplished, right? Now, it's not awesome. That is not ideal. That is not necessarily how we might practice. Our goal is to try to get whatever their assignments are and make a plan for them. But if it's a real struggle and they're not doing anything, then thinking about, okay, what is our priority for you? What can you do? Because once they start getting a routine of even some of those smaller things, what you can find is that's going to help support the other things. So if you can start off by saying, okay, what can you do? What do you think you could accomplish? Now you might have a student that's like, nothing, I can't do anything. Part of that might be a confidence or a trust or a self-esteem or accountability issue or an anxiety issue, right? So doing some of that investigative work to figure out what that barrier is and problem solving. But in this place that we're at, part of it is just being realistic, prioritizing, and just figuring out, what is it that you feel that you can do right now in this moment? What do you think you could do? Let's start there and continue on. That can be helpful.
Anna, any final thoughts in terms of things that you've experienced when you're coaching some of your kids, or you want to share?
Just that, I think it's important that we remember that this is not our typical normal, right? And remembering, what can we let go of that normal to create our new normal? And it is just a partnership of, navigating, and there might be failures, but we learn from those mistakes and we're able to move on. Be kind to ourselves too, right? Because we're doing this for the first time. And, it's okay if it's not going perfectly.
Thanks, Anna. Lindsay.
I need those reminders. Thank you, Anna.
You're right.
But I had to be forgiving of myself this morning when my dog was behaving horribly and I had to take a moment. But those are so good points. And I wanted to add just one more specific when we're talking about maybe the missing work that builds up, and just some advice to parents, which is incredibly hard advice, but incredibly valuable, because when we do discover if there's ever a list of missing work or there's assignments that weren't done or completed, we have to do our best to try not to react. And it goes against every instinct in our bones. I even, with a child that's not mine and that I'm coaching, I might get
Can you guys hear her?
She's frozen.
Yeah, no, I think she's frozen. Sorry about that, Lindsay. But with that, I think what she was saying is that, it's not, we're going to go all the way back to end where we started, which is the fact that I think that these are missing skills. And if you were at work or in a situation where you had a list of things you had to do because they were overdue, it's just, how would you feel? And if someone came up to you and said, oh my God, is this not done? right? I think that's her point. And, you know, we all think this is missing skills. We just have to kind of enter in where our kids are and try to see what you can do to help them most with planning, breaking it down, finding the littlest place to start, rewarding, watering the seeds, not the weeds. So trying to find all the times we can even say, gosh, you know, I think you got into your room right at 8 o'clock today to get going on that. You know, you made it all the way through school. And I know with you guys as coaches, and Lindsay too, you guys are all spending a lot of time talking about personal goals, not just academic goals, because right now it's just as important. So anyway, I wanted to thank everybody for attending. We are available at info@thestudypro. If you have questions, info@thestudypro. And we're also going to be back at this at noon if you want to watch it again. And we hope that you continue to participate. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.